Hi there! Welcome to day 2 of Illustrator Essentials. I'm Sam, and this is a 6-day course, so if you haven't already, I'd recommend that you find the day 1 video and review that. Today, we're going to talk about organizing objects in your files and how to combine simple things into more complex shapes. We'll do that using things like alignment, groups, transformations, and the shape builder tool. So we're going to actually start not in this logos file, but in icons.ai. If you don't already have these class files, go ahead and download them now. You can access these at files.learnsoftware.org/illustrator, and this is just the day 2 folder. So download that and open up icons.ai. So we used this in day 1 to practice building the shapes, but today we're going to talk about how to actually make the icons themselves by combining those shapes. And the first one that I'm going to do is this magnifying glass. It's a really simple icon just built from 2 circles and a rounded rectangle for the handle. First, I'm going to zoom in here. If you're not already familiar with the keyboard shortcuts to zoom in, the easiest thing that I like to do is just hold down Alt or Option on your keyboard and then use the scroll wheel on your mouse to zoom in. You can also use the Command key, or that's Control if you're on a PC, and then plus or minus to zoom in and out. So to combine these shapes into the magnifying glass, the first thing we're going to need to do is select them all. So I'm just going to use the selection tool. If you're not already there, click on the black arrow at the top of the toolbar or hit V on your keyboard. Then click and drag to draw a box that selects all 3 of these shapes. And I'm just going to use the alignment options that show up in the properties panel to put these shapes together. So anytime you have more than one shape selected, these options will pop up in the properties panel. And right now what I'm just going to do is this horizontal align center and vertical align center. Then I'll deselect everything just by clicking off of those objects and then select just the handle. And to move this straight down, there's 2 ways you can do it. You can either click and drag and just hold on to those smart guides that pop up, or hold Shift on your keyboard, and that will make sure that you can't get off of moving straight down or straight to the side. So move this straight down, or the other way that you can do that is use the keyboard arrows to just move up or down. And you can use Shift to move in larger increments with that instead of having to hit it 100 times. And then I just want to select everything again, hover just outside of the selection, and you get this curly arrow handle that will let you rotate this. And if I hold Shift, it will snap to 45-degree increments so that I can rotate it exactly 45 degrees. To combine these shapes, now that they're all lined up, I'm going to use what's called the Shape Builder tool. This is going to be over in your toolbar. This tool will be about halfway down your toolbar, and it looks kind of like a sideways snowman. It's 2 circles joining together with an arrow. Or you can also activate this tool with the keyboard shortcut Shift-M. And once you've activated that tool, you'll see when you hover over this set of shapes, the shapes have been broken down into individual regions based on where they overlap. If you're not seeing that, make sure that you go back to the selection tool, select the object, and then go to the shape builder tool. It won't work unless the object were selected. And now I can just click and drag across these boundaries to combine any of these regions. So if I click and drag here, then that builds this magnifying glass shape. And then to punch out holes in your objects, hold down Option on your keyboard, and you'll see a little minus sign appear next to the cursor. And then any areas that you click on or click and drag through will be deleted. So those areas will be left as holes in your final design. Now I'll just switch back to the selection tool and apply a fill color here so that we can see the shape that we've created. And I'll turn off the stroke. And we can see we made this simple shape here. And wherever we held Alt and Option, there are holes in the shape where certain regions have been deleted. So that's pretty straightforward, but you can get a little bit more complex. So I'm going to move down to this pin and demonstrate some other options here. So this pin is just a little bit more complex. It has more components and more steps to put them together. The first thing that I want to talk about here is different alignment options. So when I'm aligning these objects together, so I can align these on their centers, but you also have more options here, this little 3-dot menu, and this gives you more choices. So this gives you the option if you want to distribute objects, or I really like this Align To dropdown. This lets me set how the alignment is happening. It defaults to Align to Selection, which means the objects I select will just align to each other. But if I switch this to Align to Artboard, then now when I set, say move to the horizontal center, this moves everything that I have selected to the middle of my artboard, which is this white canvas area. And then the vertical center does the same thing. You could also, align to the edges using those same options. So that's really nice if you want to align things to not just the center of each other, but to the center of your workspace. And Align to Key Object is sometimes really useful. That just lets you click on one of these objects as what's called the key object, which won't move when you're doing alignment. So if I have this outer circle as the key object, now when I move other things, they all align to the edges of that object without it moving at all, which that can be really useful when you're doing more complex alignment tasks. You just align one thing to where you need it and then set it as the key object and align everything else based on it. I'm just going to undo that to get this back to normal though. And then just like we did before, I'll move this holding Shift out to the side and then select all of these objects. And I want to rotate them exactly 45 degrees. So I could do that by hovering around the outside and then holding Shift like we did earlier, or any other kinds of basic transformations like that you can also accomplish with a right click. So in a right click, you get this transform menu, and this can be really useful if you have a precise amount that you want to rotate or move something by. So in this case, I'm going to rotate by 45 degrees, and I'll check preview just to make sure I'm rotating the right direction, and then hit OK. And that's really nice if I want something precise. You can also use these other options, move by a specific amount, or reflect is really useful if you're trying to create symmetrical artwork. Draw one arm on your character and then make a copy of it, transform, reflect. Now you have two matching arms. So now I can move this line over to here. And then the last thing that I want to do here is I need another copy of this medium-sized circle. So I'm going to select that object. And there's several different ways that you can copy objects. The simplest thing is the keyboard shortcut you might already be familiar with, Command-C and Command-V. But I'm going to undo that with Command-Z, and instead I'll hit Command-F to paste. So I'm making a copy of this object and then pasting that copy right in front of the original. So now if I move this to the side, and I'll hold Shift to move it in a straight line, you can see I left behind the original, but my copy was right in front of it. So that can be really useful for keeping things aligned. The other option you might want is if you hold down Option on your keyboard, you'll get this double cursor icon, and that lets you click and drag to just copy objects live. So now I have all these objects in place. I could select them and again go to the shape builder and combine the things that need to be combined, and then hold Option and cut out all the things that need to be eliminated. Then just like we did before, I'll go back to the selection tool and put on a fill color and remove the stroke. One last thing to talk about here is grouping. So you'll notice if I select one of these objects and move it, Illustrator moves them independent of one another. And I don't want that. I want this all to stay together as a single piece of art. So what I'm going to do is hold Shift and click on both of these objects to select them both, and then just right click and select Group. And that will bring these objects permanently together so that anytime one of them is selected, they're both selected and they'll move or scale as a single piece of artwork, which is really convenient when you're done with one part of your project and you just want to leave it alone and make sure you can't accidentally mess up the great work that you've already done. If you ever want to ungroup objects, it's really simple as well. You just right click and that group button has changed to say ungroup, which is really straightforward. You can also group and ungroup with the keyboard shortcuts, Command G to group or Command Shift G to ungroup. And one last thing here, I'm going to group these back together again. And then if you double click on a group of objects, that brings you into what's called isolation mode. So you'll see this gray bar across the top of the screen, and every other object is kind of grayed out, so it's unavailable. because that means I'm focused in, I'm isolated on this group. And now when I'm isolated on this group, I can edit within the group. So if I move these objects separately, they move apart from one another. And then I just click this arrow to leave isolation mode. You might have to click it a couple times, or you can also hit escape on your keyboard to leave isolation mode. And now these are back to being treated as a normal group, but I just temporarily focused in on the group to make edits within it. So that can also be nice. It's also just good to know about because most people end up discovering isolation mode on accident when they just double click on a piece of art and then are really confused about why they can't get to other things anymore. When that happens, you just need to hit escape or click that arrow in the top left corner a couple times to leave isolation mode and go back to your normal editing mode. The last thing I just briefly want to mention is anytime you're trying to move a single object, like just moving this rectangle to the center of the artboard, the align options don't pop up in the properties panel unless you have more than one object selected. So if you're trying to just move a single thing, then you'll need to get those alignment options by going to Window, Align, and just using the Align panel. And you can come up here to say Show Options if you want to get this aligned to artboard setting, and then you could align that object to the center of something. So that can be important, but you don't normally need it because normally if you're doing alignment, you're aligning multiple objects, so things will just be in the Properties panel. And that actually finishes off all of the tools that we're going to talk about today, but it is really good to get a lot more practice with this. So go ahead, move on to some of these other icons here. Try using the Shape Builder tool to build them with these already created shapes, or use the alignment and grouping options to move things around and create the icon yourself from the shapes that are already there. One thing you might need to know, sometimes it can be useful to actually use groups in the process of your alignment. For instance, with this eye icon, you have this circle, and then I'll just Option click and drag to create a copy of it, Shift so that it stays lined up. And if I select these two objects and I want to, get them lined up to the center of my artboard, they'll move as individual objects, which isn't very helpful for me. So what I might want to do is actually group these objects together, and then they'll move together. So I'm actually going to need the Align panel for that. And that makes sure that it's this group of objects that's aligned instead of the individual objects being aligned. So that's just a little strategy tip that you might need. And then you should also try this logos file. This is a lot more difficult practice because you have to come up with the plan and create the shapes yourself. So use the shape tools that we talked about last time and the alignment and shape builder options that we talked about today to create one or some of these icons. They go from pretty straightforward on the top row to quite complex on the bottom row in the number of shapes that they require and the complexity of getting those shapes aligned to each other. So go ahead and try that. I'll show you an example real quick, just if you want some inspiration. And then we'll be excited to have you back for day 3 when we're going to be talking about color. Thanks for coming.